Well, welcome back, folks. Today we're going to begin the actual physical breakdown of the Suzuki TS50 restoration project. But before we get into the mechanics of that, I did want to briefly touch on my approach in general to breaking down a project such as this. Now, I did cover this topic in some detail well over a year ago when I broke down the Honda SL125 project. For the benefit of those that have joined the channel since or missed that video, I'm going to touch on some of the key elements of breaking down a project, how I approach it, and there'll be a little pop-up here that will pop up in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. You can click on that and I'll take you back to that video if you want to either see it again or you haven't seen it yet. My general approach to breaking down a project is, well, first I organize myself, and you can see here I've got a pad, a notepad, a pencil, I've got my little shop camera. I take photos of everything. I take literally, and I'm serious about that, hundreds of photos during the process of breakdown. I want to document the as bought or as started condition. Now, that's not to say that this bike was reassembled over the years by people taking it apart. It's probably had multiple owners. In fact, I know it has. And who knows if it's in the original condition, but it's what I have to work with right now. And I will cross-reference, if necessary, or if there's doubt in my mind, the photos that I take with online documentation, other photos online, parts diagrams, etc., so that when I go to put it back together, I can put it back as built by Suzuki back in the early 70s. That's my objective. Now, if this was a rider, that's probably not quite as important for you, but for me, for restoration, I want to get it as perfect as I can be. And an example of that would be the hinges on the seat, the pins that hold the seat in place. There's typically two hinges. We'll see that eventually. There's two pins that go through the hinges with a split pin or a cotter pin that will hold those together. And, you know, the question becomes, you know, do both of them go through from back to front? Do they go through from front to back? Do they come together like this? I've seen all combinations over the years when I've taken apart a bike. The question in my mind is I really don't care about that. What I want to know is how was it done originally by Suzuki. Usually, not always I don't think, but usually they go from back to front, but who knows. We'll get in there and we'll discover. But that's an example where I will document first as I'm taking the bike apart how it is currently, and I'll reference, as I indicated, other online materials to try to make sure when I put it back it's correct. So before I take anything apart, I document the bike thoroughly. I've already done that actually in this condition, that is all assembled, but as I begin the breakdown process, I will take dozens and dozens, end up being hundreds of photos of every nut, bolt, washer, screw, the orientation, the direction, and then I will, and I use my little camera there for that, of course. I don't use my personal cell phone camera. This little camera is fairly old, but takes great pictures. It's very easy for me to pull the pictures off of that and into my shop computer, and I store them in a particular directory where I keep all the photos for this project together. And then eventually they will, in real time, actually get copied off to a server that I have from my own personal network, a NAS or a network attached storage, so they're backed up real time. That's kept in the house, of course, but I digress. So all those pictures will be taken with this little camera and stored online for my reference later on. So that takes some time to do that. Now, if I was just to start breaking this bike down and not recording video and not doing photos, I can have this bike apart in an hour, maybe two, no problem. But doing photos, and certainly if I'm going to do any video work while I go, it's going to take quite a bit longer than that for obvious reasons. When I break down the bike, also, I don't typically break it all down to every last nut, bolt, and screw as I go. I know some people do that, and they just chuck it all in a box. I don't care to do it that way. What I do is I break it down into assemblies. An example would be the handlebars. When I pull the handlebars off, I will leave the controls, the throttle, the grips, and the wiring attached to the bars. I will obviously disconnect the wiring where it goes into the headlight shell. I will disconnect the cables, and then the handlebars will come off as a sub-assembly with everything attached to them, and they'll just be set aside, and I will come back to them when I'm prepared to work on them or to take the bars apart for rechroming at another time. So I break it down in assemblies. Same with the headlight. I'll just break it free from the rest of the wiring harness and leave the headlight intact and just remove it from the headlight ears. I prefer to break it down in sub-assemblies that you end up with less parts, number one. And number two, it just makes it a little clearer in my mind later on when I'm going to move on to an assembly such as the headlight or the handlebars. I don't have parts scattered all over the place. Even if you put them in plastic bags or have some way of organizing your components, I find it's more challenging later to try to round up everything and put it back together. That's why I break it down in sub-assemblies. So the wheels, I will not take the wheels apart until I'm ready to work on them. I will remove them from the bike, obviously. The seat, I will pull the seat off, but I'll leave the hinges on it, etc., etc. And then you will see back there, I have a white clear, or it's not white, it's clear, plastic bin that many of the components will go into. The smaller items will go into that plastic bin, and it pretty much will stay right there behind the bike during the duration of the project. And then I have I think they call those bread racks or bread makers racks. It's got wheels on it. You can see the little casters. The larger assemblies will go on that rack. I've used that same rack for ages. I've had it for years. So it's seen multiple restorations. So for instance, the fuel tank will go on there. The body side covers will go on there. The larger components that won't fit into the clear plastic bin there will be stored on that rack for easy access, and try to keep things organized here a little bit. So that's my basic approach to breaking down the project. It's pretty straightforward. Depending on my approach, once I've got the bike fundamentally broken down, and what I'm trying to get to here initially is I want to get the frame and all the black glossy parts that are going to be powder coated. I need to get those parts free. Obviously, in order to get to the frame, I got to get everything off of it, including pulling the motor. I want to get those black parts grouped together and get them organized because I'm going to send them off to the powder coater. Now, someone's going to say, I thought you do your own powder coating. Well, I do, except I can't do the frame. The frame is too large for me to fit into my oven. So I have to just, by definition, take the frame to a separate part of the powder coater to have that done. And while I'm doing it, I'm just going to have them do everything else. Everything else that's black that needs to be powder coated. And it's just, everything will match. It's all done at the same time. And it's just easier for me. And if I have any items left over, anything I've missed, anything I have to replace later on, then, and it's small enough, I'll powder coat it myself in my oven. But initially, because I got to have the frame done anyway, it all goes off the powder coater. So that's step number one, is get everything on its way to the powder coater. I can't do much further with the reassembly until that's complete. Next item I'll look at typically is chrome. So after I've had everything broken down into the sub-assemblies, I then will take a look at getting my chrome organized to send that off. I might do that right away. I might wait a little bit. It depends on the project and my thinking. But clearly in this bike, there's not a lot of chrome actually. But you've got your wheels. I've got to inspect those yet and decide if I'm going to have them chrome. Probably will. That little heat shield on the exhaust system, that needs a little straightening, but that was chromed. Obviously the handlebars need to be re-chromed. Make sure they're straight before I send them off. They're flaking really bad, the chrome. The headlight ears, the headlight shell, the rear shocks, the top cover for the rear shocks. I'm not real sure what I'm going to do there yet. I got to determine whether I can break those down. The lowers on the front forks right here, those will go off, so I have to break the shocks apart to get at those, etc. So normally, after I get the powder coating on its way, I would probably turn to chrome and then the bodywork. So we've got, that being the painted parts, we've got the tank, the front fender, the two body side covers, and the rear fender, all this Suzuki blue. All those parts, or most of those parts, need repair. The tank has dents, the front fender needs some welding repair. I think the side covers are probably okay. I've got to inspect them a little closer. I know that rear fender right there, that rear fender has cracks, stress cracks in it, and needs some repair also before I can send that off. So quite often in there somewhere I'll organize the bodywork together and I will prepare, have to start preparing it to send it off, and that's going to require some repair. However, normally the very first major component I will work on will be the engine. After I pull it from the frame, I prefer to do my engine work first, put it right up on my workbench right over here, and decide what I'm going to do with the engine. Usually they get split, get inside and replace the bearings. We've talked about this engine. I'm not sure I'm going to do that yet, but certainly the engine will end up on the bench pretty early in this entire process. Let's see, what else do we do? The seat I don't really do much with initially. Eventually that will be, well, I'll have to pull the seat apart because that pan underneath there is black, and again, I'm going to send it off with a powder coater. But in terms of doing much with the seat, recovering, repulsing, that will come much, much later. Even when I get that seat pan back, I'll just set it aside and deal with the seat quite a bit later on in the process. The wheels, the spokes, the nipples, after I've broken the wheels apart, I don't know if those spokes are still available. They might be. I do have a shop or a place that's about 150 miles away from me that will do replating of zinc and cadmium on the nipples. They do a really nice job. You send them a box of parts and 2 weeks later it comes back. It's relatively inexpensive. It's often cheaper than, not always, but it's often cheaper than buying new or NOS. Certainly cheaper than new. And sometimes the math works out, sometimes it doesn't. So I haven't given that any thought in terms of the wheels and the bearings and the hubs and the seals and the wheels. I haven't even given any thought yet. Don't like doing wheels, so I tend to block that out of my thinking because I just don't like dealing with them. But they will have to be confronted eventually. So that's generally going to be my approach. Quick thumbnail of how to break it down. I'm not going to be able to show you every step of everything I break down here because it would, we'd be here for hours. Like I said, it's going to take quite a bit of time to document everything. The fuel tank has already been drained of fuel, though I'm sure there's some residual fuel in that tank right now. The transmission oil has been drained, so all the fluids have been removed. The tank, or the engine and tank, are dry. Of course, that tank has that funky liner, that poorly applied liner. I talked about that in a previous video. So somewhere in here I'll fit in stripping that original or that liner out before I move on to getting the tank repaired and repainted. My painter will have the tanks lined. Whoever he has lines his tanks for him does a great job. I mean, I think it's a radiator shop, but they do a great job of lining tanks. And I often just, not always, but I often just let him take care of lining them. If I'm sending it out to be painted, if I'm painting it myself, I will, of course, line it myself. And I haven't decided on this bike whether I'm going to paint it or not. I'll probably send it out to be painted only because of the time of year. We're in early, as I'm shooting this video, we're going into the autumn or fall season. And I won't be able to paint now until probably next May or June, which is, many months away. And we'll see. I haven't really decided on that. A lot of work to be done before I get there. So we're going to go ahead and start breaking it down here. And again, I'm not going to show every nuance, but I'll give you a flavor of the various pieces and steps that I go through. Better part of 4 hours later now. I've shot a lot of video. Most of the disassembly of the project is complete. But I think I'm going to call it quits for now. I've had enough for the day. I don't work on projects usually all day. I usually work on my motorcycle projects in the morning, and then I do other things later in the day. So we're going to call it quits for now. Got a long ways though. Still a couple things, major things left to do. The front fender bracket and the horn up here under the steering head have to come out. The cabling going to the carburetor, I have to pull that off. The main wiring harness or loom right here. It's just laying there. I can just lift that away. Front and rear tires, of course, have to come off. The wheels, rear shocks, front shocks have to come off. Front forks. And then the major piece, of course, is removing the engine. So all of those elements we just talked about will be part of this second in this disassembly series. There will be at least 2 in this series, if not 3 by the time it's done, I think. We'll have to just see how it goes in this when I start shooting this next video, which will probably be tomorrow or the next day. So at this point, I'm going to call this a wrap. Any issues, questions, thoughts, drop me a note. Otherwise, as usual, thanks for watching.